Back in 2025, we saw two nuclear-armed neighbors go right to the brink of all-out war, and then pull back in less than 3 weeks. It was a really intense conflict, fought with missiles, artillery, and for the very first time, drones. So let's break down exactly how this crisis unfolded, step by step.
It all started with this one number, 26.
So what does that number mean? Well, 26 civilians, mostly tourists, were killed in a horrific terrorist attack in Pahalgam, an Indian-administered Kashmir. And that single, tragic event on April 22nd, that was the spark that lit the fuse on a massive diplomatic and military firestorm.
In that firestorm, it ignited almost instantly. The shock of the attack just gave way to this full-blown diplomatic breakdown.
And man, the response was swift and just severe. India immediately pointed the finger at militants with links to Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, flatly denied it, but that didn't matter. What we saw next was this rapid-fire, tit-for-tat escalation. Key treaties were suspended, diplomats got expelled, visas were canceled, and borders were slammed shut. Pakistan hit back by closing its airspace, which basically ground all regional travel to a halt.
Now, suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, you gotta understand, that was a huge deal. This wasn't just some symbolic move. This treaty has been in place since 1960. It's a cornerstone of regional stability, managing water for millions and millions of people. So to suspend it, that was a clear signal that this crisis was different. It was far more serious.
So, with diplomacy basically shredded, the crisis just started climbing up that escalation ladder. It went from angry words and closed embassies to, well, the battlefield, and it happened fast.
Okay, so on May 7th, India launches Operation Sindoor. They used missile and airstrikes against what they claimed were 9 militant sites. Pakistan denied these were purely militant targets and, just 2 days later, hit back with Operation Bunyan al-Marsus, unleashing drone and artillery strikes against Indian military bases. So you have two very different operations, two different playbooks, but they're both heading in one single, incredibly dangerous direction, straight up.
And to give you a sense of just how big a deal this was, these weren't your typical border skirmishes. We're talking about the deepest military strikes into Pakistani territory by India since their major war way back in 1971. I mean, this was a massive, historic move.
And of course, the world was watching. The international press picked up on it right away. Reuters put it pretty bluntly, calling it the worst fighting between neighbors in over 2 decades. Everyone was holding their breath.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just a rerun of old fights. Something was fundamentally different this time. Something new happening in the skies over South Asia.
And this is the real game changer here. The 2025 conflict was the first time ever that 2 nuclear powers had fought a drone war against each other. Think about that. It set this incredibly chilling new precedent, showing off a new, tech-driven kind of combat between 2 countries that have the ultimate weapon.
Just as fast as this whole thing flared up, you had this huge international push to pull both sides back from the edge. And the result? A very, very uneasy ceasefire.
Let's just run through the timeline because the speed here is absolutely breathtaking. You have the attack on April 22nd, then India's military response on May 7th, Pakistan hits back on the 9th, and then boom, a ceasefire on May 10th. The entire shooting war, from the first strike to the truce, lasted just 3 days. 3!
Now, that ceasefire didn't just appear out of nowhere. It took some really intense U.S. mediation. President Trump and Secretary Rubio were heavily involved, trying to get both sides to publicly agree to stop, even while they were still throwing accusations at each other.
But even when the guns went silent, the damage was already done. The fighting might have stopped, but the impact of those few weeks, that was going to stick around for a long, long time.
And the aftermath was messy. Your diplomatic relations totally frozen. A real humanitarian cost that was still being added up. A crazy information war was still raging online, and the domestic politics in both countries were changed for good. And yeah, on top of that Indus Waters Treaty, another huge agreement, the Shimla Agreement, was also tossed out.
And we can never forget the people caught in the middle. Beyond that initial attack, it was the civilians living along the line of control in Kashmir who really paid the price. We're talking about displacement, the constant fear of shelling, and living with cross-border fire every single day.
At the exact same time, there was a whole other war being fought. Not with drones and missiles, but with tweets, with headlines, with memes.
Social media and news channels on both sides just became these digital battlegrounds, fueling all this nationalist anger with a ton of disinformation.
And inside Pakistan, the conflict had a really clear political effect. It sparked this huge wave of patriotic rallies and demonstrations, and that led to a major spike in public support and approval for the military. So let's just recap this whole whirlwind of a crisis one more time. It all kicks off with that terrible terrorist attack. That triggers deep military strikes from India. That was Operation Sindoor. Pakistan answers back with its own drone and artillery attacks, Operation Bunyan-el-Marsus. Then the U.S. steps in to broker a ceasefire on May 10th, which stops the shooting but leaves behind this total mess of broken treaties and sky-high tensions.
Look, the 2025 conflict gave us all this terrifying peek into what the future of war could look like. It set a new and, frankly, a very dangerous precedent. And it really leaves us with one critical question to think about. This was the first drone war between two nuclear powers. So, what happens when the next one begins?